We who are not the Zimbabwe are living at a very fragile moment. As a nation, Americans have built up a number of bills which they may not be able to pay, and the moment of reckoning is near. Furthermore, the enormously complex and extended systems required to support us are centralized to an extent that one faulty switch can black out those systems for 1,000 miles around. What will happen when, quote, what will happen when the resource-supplying countries begin to withhold resources because they foresee the day when their own demand will require the available supplies, unquote, asked J.W. Forrester in 1971 in World Dynamics, the technical version of The Limits to Growth. In 1973, we see that the resource-supplying countries are already aware of this awesome power they hold over the resource-dependent countries. Oil appears to be the first to feel the squeeze, and as I write this, President Nixon is trying to summon world sympathy for the energy crisis. But is it a world problem? The United States, representing 1/17 of the world's population, is consuming 1/3 of the energy consumed by the whole world annually. As a result, and a report from the Army Corps of Engineers proclaims, quote, we are confronting an imminent energy crisis. Recent reports from industry and from representatives of public and scientific communities predict that the United States energy demand is expected to increase threefold by the year 2000, unquote. Perhaps it is the U.S. that is the world's problem. Will there be wars fought over dwindling resources? Considering Venezuela's plans to limit oil exports in the future, can the Shah of Iran's nationalization of his country's oil industry be considered a threat to U.S. security? Quote, a country that runs on oil, thump, 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 can't afford thump to run short, thump stops. That was a commercial at the time. And should we run short, can we merely crank back our standard of living? Perhaps, but how fast can we crank back our population? Quote, the Malthusian thesis has been true and at work at all times. Population is regulated to the food supply. But thus far, man has caused population to continue to increase by being able to push up the food supply, the, quote, green revolution, unquote, which fossil fuel has built of herbicides, pesticides, new strains, and monolithic cultivation. Unquote. The answer is that our population can in fact be cranked back very fast indeed. The high density of population is possible only because of industrialization. Without industrialization, the population could not be sustained. A point may be reached where continuing the industrial process means a population collapse from pollution, while stopping the industrial process means a population collapse from failure of the technical support systems, unquote. The footnotes are at the end. We may well envy the Zimbabwe their rapid feedback. It has taken nearly 20 years for us to notice that DDT does not, quote, go away, unquote, for us to realize, in fact, that there is no such place as a way. And a lot has come to depend on its use, including present population levels. The moment is fragile, but it will not be for long. Quote, there are always severe stresses in the transition. Pressures must rise far enough to suppress the forces that produce growth. Not only is the world facing the pressures that will stop population growth, but it also is encountering the pressures that will stop the rise of both industrialization and the world average standard of living. Unquote. Forrester speaks of the world, but the United States has been centralization's captain. Now it gets to lead the charge. Over the next 20 years, we may see it martyred because what we are charging is our natural limits. The machine will be stopped one way or another. Quote, our greatest immediate challenge is how to guide the transition from growth to equilibrium, unquote. The man I have quoted so heavily in the last few paragraphs is J.W. Forrester, whom we have to thank for helping to develop the tool which now enables us to begin to predict the actions of very complex systems. Systems which are too complex for the human mind to trace and input through, systems like the world economy, the weather, or a homestead. He was also the first to apply this new tool to the world in an attempt to predict the actions produced if present trends of level changes of population, materials, resources, capital investment, pollution, and capital investment in agriculture continue. The tool is a computer model. It cannot perform magic and must be based on human understanding of systems, parts, and data, but it can carry inputs through the system completely and without error, something which even in simple systems soon becomes a superhuman feat. Forrester presents his human understanding with mathematical precision, as demanded by computer modeling, for cross-examination by the public and his colleagues. He does not make great claims for his model, but points out that it is the only model so far available. It is not yet very complete, and the work of building onto it and testing the assumptions upon which it is based goes on. But the model's predictions have already been published in Technical World Dynamics and somewhat less technical Limits to Growth form, because the predictions are very alarming and demand immediately private and public attention. Here, in Forrester's words, are some of the issues raised by his model. The most rational look we have at our future. 1. Quote, 1. Industrialization may be a more fundamental, disturbing force on world ecology than population. 2. Within the next century, man may face choices from a four-pronged dilemma: suppression of modern industrial society by a natural resource shortage, decline of world population from changes wrought by pollution, population limitation by food shortage, or population collapse from war, disease, and social stresses caused by physical and psychological crowding. 3. We may now be living in a, quote, golden age, unquote, when, in spite of a widely acknowledged feeling of malaise, the quality of life is, on the average, higher than ever before in history and higher now than the future offers. 4. Exhortations and programs directed at population control may be inherently self-defeating. If population control begins to result, as hoped, in higher per capita food supply and material standard of living, these very improvements may relax the pressures and generate forces to trigger a resurgence of population growth. 5. The high standard of living of modern industrial society seems to result from a production of food and material goods that has been able to outrun the rising population. But as agriculture reaches its space limit, as industrialization reaches a natural resource limit, and as both reach a pollution limit, population tends to catch up. Population then grows until the quality of life falls far enough to stabilize population. 6. There may be no realistic hope of the present underdeveloped countries reaching a standard of living demonstrated by the present industrialized nations. The pollution and natural resources load placed on the world environmental system by each person in an advanced country is probably 20 to 50 times greater than the load now generated by a person in an underdeveloped country. With 4 times as many people in underdeveloped countries as in the present developed countries, their rising to the economic level that has been set as a standard by the industrialized nations could mean an increase of 10 times in the natural resource and pollution load on the world environment. Noting the destruction that has already occurred on land, in the air, and especially in the oceans, capability appears not to exist for handling such a rise in standard of living. In fact, the present disparity between the developed and the underdeveloped nations may be equalized as much by the decline in the developed countries as by an improvement in the underdeveloped countries. My emphasis, that would be my underlying. 7. A society with a high level of industrialization may be unsustainable. It may be self-extinguishing if it exhausts the natural resources on which it depends. Or, if unending substitution for declining natural resources were possible, a new international strife over pollution and environmental rights might pull the average worldwide standard of living back to the level of a century ago. From the long view, 8. From the long view of 100 years hence, the present efforts of underdeveloped countries to industrialize may be unwise. They may now be closer to an ultimate equilibrium with the environment than are the industrial nations. The present underdeveloped countries may be in a better condition for surviving forthcoming worldwide environmental and economic pressure than are the advanced countries. If one of the several forces strong enough to cause a collapse in world population does arise, the underdeveloped countries might suffer far less than their share of the decline, because economies with less organization, integration, and specialization are probably less vulnerable to disruption. My emphasis. What does all this mean for you? For one thing, if you have been planning on settling into some city, suburban, or even country life, putting a little money in the bank for a rainy day, and living your days out in this basic security while you watch your children grow up, you will never realize your plan. The rainy day that is coming may last 40 days and 40 nights. Well, right there, I'm going to change again, and this is leaving you pretty much on a bummer, but I'll pick it up tomorrow.